Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world. And so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I do hope you're doing great. I'm doing fantastic, thank you very much. And I just send you all a lovely big hug because we're on part 2 of our story tonight. And if you haven't heard part 1, click on the description because you don't want to miss out on the entire story. And let's continue with part 2 of our story. As Eddie drove his vehicle away from the small town, some of the craggy, somewhat bumpy, remote sequestered roads became decidedly dark, as the inauspicious moonlight on this night was not exactly friendly, so all they could really see ahead of them was Eddie's headlights. Eddie did not bat an eyelid. He had grown up in these parts and was well used to navigating roads in the pitch black, and was not intimidated in the slightest. It would take more to intimidate him, that was for sure. Sinead nervously glanced out of the passenger side window. Her shoulders tightened, her back stiffened, and her heart beat a little faster. She became infinitely more tense, but Eddie understood why. If you weren't from this part of the world, driving down these remote country lanes with little moonlight could be a cautionary experience indeed. "Don't worry," he assured Sinead, who had grown unusually quiet. "It's so dark out there, uncomfortably so. I don't like it at all. I mean, the moonlight is practically non-existent. It's a nightmare." "I know how you feel, Sinead, but I assure you, I know my way around here very well, with my eyes closed. So you're in safe hands. I've been driving these roads since I was a little boy." It would seem Eddie was right, because before long, after jolting up and down rather precariously on their car seats over bumpy dirt roads, they were soon driving down a very smooth driveway, well, relatively smooth, surrounded by pretty countryside and lofty tall congregations of trees, that in the dark shadows of the night seemed like dense cardboard cutouts on the background. It was about 11:30 at night when Eddie pulled up outside Ned's farmhouse. The good news is that Sinead had seen fit to leave some lights on in the house, along with an outside light, which offered a soft illumination that made her sigh with relief, for the lights certainly succeeded in subduing the darkness. She was thankful to be safely back at Ned's farmhouse, and seeing its familiar ambiguous silhouette against the jet-blackened firmament was the most welcome sight indeed. It would seem that the farmhouse's imperfections were ironed away by the velvet darkness, so that its asymmetrical features seemed pretty close to perfect. But Eddie knew in the officious light of the morning it would be very easy to see that this house was really quite dilapidated and crying out for a great deal of TLC, and obviously needed extensive work done on it. The sash windows were begging to be repaired, as their warped wooden frames needed replacing, and the house itself was longing for a new lick of fresh paint. As Eddie climbed out of his truck and opened up the passenger side door for Sinead, he walked her to the front door and was telling himself he should not go in for coffee, even if she asked him in for one. He couldn't trust himself not to kiss this woman, and it was because he liked her that he didn't want to move in on her like a lion on its prey. He wanted to take things very slowly with Sinead and behave like the perfect gentleman. But Sinead asked him in if he'd like to come in for a coffee. Eddie found it close to impossible to decline such an irresistible invite, but was determined to behave himself. Quirky women like Sinead were a rare treasure that you handled with care, lest she should slip through your fingers. "I really should be going," he said, glancing at his cell phone. "I mean, it is getting rather late." "Oh, go on," said Sinead. "A coffee won't kill you, and I have no intention of eating you up if that's what you're worried about," she teased. "I told you, I'm not that kind of girl." "Well, in that case, how can I refuse?" said Eddie, grinning. "A coffee would be great." Meg Riley. Meg was feeling a lot stronger. The doctor had told her she needed to stay in bed to fully recuperate from her bad bout of pneumonia. In the beginning, the condition had gripped her so brutally hard that even if she'd wanted to break free from the bonds of her confinement, she had been held captive under its dominating control, as it had punished her unkindly, rendering her pathetically weak and ridiculously helpless like a new baby. Indeed, there were times she had been so delicate, so physically fragile, that she could barely walk from the bedroom to the bathroom. But there'd been a decided improvement in her health today, and she felt a great deal more like her old self. Indeed, she'd been surreptitiously walking around her bedroom, behind her husband's back, because if he'd seen her up and about, he would not have been terribly pleased. Her long-suffering husband Reuben had been devotedly standing by her side, attending to her every need, like a dutiful butler, but he would not allow her to do a single thing, and this was beginning to annoy Meg greatly. Meg was currently feeling like a bird with clipped wings, confined to its cage, that was simply longing to fly again, and this longing was becoming like an insatiable itch that she was desperate to scratch. Even though she'd begged her husband to let her have a quick wander in the backyard so that she could clandestinely snoop through the hole in the fence to get a bird's-eye view of the neighbour's front porch. They were an interesting couple who had lived in the adjacent property next to them for years, but they were always having spirited barneys that Meg found highly entertaining to watch, and she loved informing the townsfolk what the couple were fighting about this time. Believe it or not, their last fight had been over chocolate. Of all the things in the entire world to fight over, this was certainly a first. Mrs. Philippa Byzantine had told her husband he'd hidden her chocolate stash. "I know you took it, and you hid it from me. Where did you put it?" she said to him on the porch, pounding her fingers accusingly into his chest, which could not have been comfortable, for Philippa Byzantine had long manicured nails that were as sharp as a tiger's claws. She was always the kind of woman who wore rebellion on her person like a choker chain around her neck. "I want my chocolate right now. I need it. You know I need my chocolate," she had chortled. "How dare you hide it from me?" "You're not having any more chocolate, sweetheart. Enough is enough. I'm doing this for your own good. If you eat any more chocolate, you won't fit through the front door." "How dare you? How dare you say that to me?" Philippa cried out. "Are you trying to say that I'm fat? Are you saying I'm fat?" "You said it, not me," her husband answered. "You think you're so clever, don't you? Well, you know where I'm going. I'm going to town to buy myself some more chocolate. Because if I want chocolate, I'm going to have it, and there's not a damn thing you can do about it." Meg would watch Philippa Byzantine, marching off to her car, driving away indignantly, revving up the car engine, and accelerating down the street, like someone with an axe to grind. Meg always knew where she was going, to buy replacement chocolates, of course. Meg would find out from the owner of the sweet shop in town exactly what Philippa Byzantine had bought. Last time she had brought 3 chocolate Hershey bars, 1 big Swiss Toblerone, 3 Mars bars, 3 large packets of chocolate chip cookies, a bag of chocolate-covered peanuts, and 3 packets of chocolate Maltesers. And when Meg checked the bin the very next day, she saw the evidence all tucked neatly away in a plastic bag, hidden away from prying eyes. Only Meg's eyes, well, they never missed a trick, did they? "I should have been a sleuth," she would tell herself. "No one can hide anything from me." And she wasn't wrong about that. She had secretly marvelled that Philippa Byzantine could eat so much in a single sitting. Philippa Byzantine was claiming it was a mystery that she kept piling on the weight. "I don't understand," she'd say to the townsfolk. "I eat absolutely nothing. Not a single thing. I barely eat at all. I eat like a little rabbit. And I only have to look at a Hershey kiss, and I put on weight so fast." But everyone knew the truth, thanks to Meg, that Philippa Byzantine ate enough chocolate to sink the Titanic, if the truth be told. But no one told her. They were on to her. "Meg, sweetheart," said her husband, intruding on her thoughts as he entered the bedroom. Meg was pondering how she could slip out of the house behind his back, to snoop on the Byzantines. "You heard what the doctor said," her husband said, almost as if he could read her thoughts. "You're far too weak to go wandering around the backyard, spying on our next-door neighbours. You need lots of rest and plenty of fluid." "I'm bored silly, trussed up in the bed," Meg had complained, blowing sorrowfully into her tissue and letting out a couple of hoarse coughs. Damn! Why did the back of her throat tickle so much? And why did she sometimes feel unfortunately dizzy when she got out of bed? It wasn't fair. She was tired of being sick. "See, I told you," said her husband defiantly. "You're in a bad way. That dry cough sounds quite dreadful." "I'm much better than you think I am," she assured him. "My cough makes me sound ill, but I'm actually feeling relatively perky actually. Much better than I've felt in a long time." "If that were true, why is your appetite so poor? You've barely eaten a thing in the last few days, and you're constantly falling asleep. In my opinion, your body is still struggling to recover, and you need to give it plenty of time. You need to exercise some patience. I know what you're like, Meg, only too well. You want to be gallivanting around town, snooping into everyone's business. But for once in your life, you're going to have to abide by the doctor's orders. And I have to put my foot down on this. Otherwise, you won't be getting any better." Meg secretly pooh-poohed her husband's words, and when he wasn't looking, she made a face behind his back. She was tired of being cooped up in the house for so long, and tired of Reuben telling her what to do. But underneath the flaky layers of her denial, she knew her husband was right. She had a way to go before she felt significantly better. Meg's cell phone lit up and began to ring with that annoying ringtone that never bothered Meg in the slightest, because she enjoyed gassing away for hours on end on her phone with her best friend Lisa Malusin, who was doing a fabulous job in keeping her up to date with all the latest town gossip. "Meg, you're not going to believe it. I've got some very interesting news that's going to fascinate you," came Lisa's excited voice. "A young woman has just come into the bar tonight. And guess who she's meeting up with for a date?" "Eddie Tanner?" asked Meg. "Right on the money. I knew you would get it right first time round. The rumour is that she's moved into Ned's old farmhouse. Everyone wishes you were up here right now because you would know exactly who she was and why she's here in town. But no one knows that. She's clearly connected to Ned in some way. It seems like Eddie Tanner is quite taken by her. I've been watching him from the other side of the bar, and let me tell you something for nothing. Eddie is acting very differently towards her compared to other women he's dated in the past. As if he really, really likes her. You know what I mean? Really, really likes her. As if she's the kind of woman that could anchor him to the spot, if you know what I mean." "No, what do you mean?" asked Meg. "You're not explaining yourself terribly well, Lisa. I wish you wouldn't talk in riddles. It's very annoying." "Well, what I'm trying to say, Meg, is I believe he's genuinely interested in what she has to say. And his leg, well, it was nervously twitching. And there was this look in his eyes, like a sparkle. It's hard to explain. But I think Eddie Tanner was falling for her, hook, line and sinker. Can you believe it?" "No, I can't." "What does she look like?" "Well, you know, she's pretty enough, I suppose. But I've seen Eddie around even more attractive women than her. But they haven't made that impression on him like she has. She's actually making him wobble at the knees. I've never seen anything like it before. It's a spectacle to watch." "But who is she? What's she doing in town?" Lisa let out a laugh. "We would like to know the answers to those enigmatic questions, Meg, but as you're not around, we are none the wiser. But as Ethan was saying, without you in full action mode, none of us are going to know much about her. Anyway, I thought I had to let you know what was going on. I'm not even sure she's moved into Ned's old place. At the moment, it's a rumour, but I'm imagining it's probably correct." "So they're there at the bar now?" asked Meg curiously. "Eddie and this mystery woman, they're still there?" "Oh, absolutely. I'm watching them as I speak and as I drink my vodka," said Lisa, purring happily into the phone. "But I haven't got your brass balls, Meg. I really wish I did. I'd never have the guts to go up to her and give her the third degree like you would do if you were here." After Lisa's revelations, Meg began twitching restlessly in her bed. She couldn't bear being confined to her bedroom a moment longer like this. Enough was enough. She was sleeping in the spare bedroom while she recuperated, as her incessant dry coughing had kept her husband Reuben wide awake. She missed not sharing a bed with him, There was nothing pleasant about being ill. Meg's desire to learn more about the strange girl in town was practically suffocating her. She needed answers to her questions, and she needed answers now, and those answers just could not wait. Who was she, this new arrival? What was she doing here anyway? How did she intend to make a living? How was she related to the recently deceased Ned Oldman? How old was she? Where was she from? Why had she moved here? How long did she intend to stay? What did she look like? And why was Eddie Tanner so captivated by her? Furthermore, what did this woman actually think about Eddie Tanner? Was she nurturing a pathetic crush like so many other women had done? Or was this woman a little more discerning than most? If Eddie was so taken by her, she clandestinely suspected that this woman was not cooing at his every word. In her wizened experience, men always wanted what they couldn't have. It was their inborn hunting instinct. Meg knew that she needed to find out these answers for herself. She wanted them now, to satiate her insatiable curiosity, which was so itchy, if she didn't scratch it now, it would practically drive her completely insane. She had been born a journalist, even though she wasn't one, because Meg knew how to extract information out of people, like a bee removes nectar from a flower. Meg knew what needed to be done. It would be what any skillful, self-respecting journalist would do in the circumstances when they could smell a story on the wind, stop at nothing to acquire it. She would drive to the wooded clearing near Ned's old farmhouse. She would then amble over to the farmhouse to ask the mystery woman if she could borrow her telephone to call her husband, because she could pretend her car wasn't working, that the engine had seized up, and her cell phone was on the blink. She masterfully practiced the lines in her head, like a hardened professional. "Oh, hello there! Oh, I am so dreadfully sorry to bother you, especially at this time of night. My name's Meg Riley. I'm from the town. My engine, would you believe it, it's seized up, not far from your farmhouse. I was driving around, you see, looking for my little cat who appears to have just disappeared. And my cell phone is on the blink. That dreadful thing of mine never works. I must get a new one. My husband's always telling me so. Do you mind awfully if I impose on you and come in? And if I could borrow your phone to call my husband to come and rescue me. My car's not parked terribly far away from your farmhouse. It's in the wooded clearing over there. I also would very much appreciate a glass of water. My throat is terribly dry. As I say, I'm so sorry to disturb you like this at this late time." This way the kind woman, who would clearly be very sympathetic, would invite her in, offering her a coffee, while Meg skillfully pretended to call her husband to pick her up. And then she would act like she was going back to her car to wait for him, after of course expunging all the information she needed out of this stranger. At a guess, she assumed the woman would likely be back from the bar in town after about 11:30, and that was when she would pounce on her, by arriving at her door, complaining her car was stuck behind the wooded clearing at the back of the property, and Meg had walked to Ned's farmhouse for help, as of course it was the nearest house. She was practicing her words as if reciting a script she needed to learn off by heart for a theatrical production, but nothing intimidated Meg. She could be quite the actress when the need arose. Meg was convinced she could pull this off seamlessly. Besides, it was a believable enough story, as people helped each other out in this part of the world. And as to why she was driving around at the late hours of the night, she could claim she was looking for her lost cat, that one of the townsfolk had spotted on the road close to Ned's farmhouse, even though she didn't own one, but the woman didn't know that. She could only hope that the woman had not invited Eddie Tanner to stay over and spend the night with her. But if that was the case, it didn't matter, even though she knew Eddie Tanner would ultimately be on to her, and not buy her fictitious story about her car engine seizing up. Eddie Tanner knew she was a town snoop, but he was hardly going to disclose this information to a woman he'd only just met for their very first date. Even if the tiresome Eddie Tanner was there, she would still consummately worm her way into Ned's farmhouse and ask this woman a host of questions, and ask them she would. Meg knew that her husband would never allow her to leave her property at night, especially in her current physical condition, But that was not a problem as far as Meg was concerned. She had her tricks up her sleeve. She'd slip a sleeping pill into his drink when he wasn't watching, and he'd be out like a light. It always worked like a charm every time. Before long, Reuben Riley was lying fast asleep on their couch, snoring loudly. She covered him with a blanket. He looked rather like their old, rather ungainly bulldog Gandalf when he was alive. Maybe they don't say dogs are like their owners for nothing, as Reuben looked like the human version of Gandalf, except thankfully his tongue wasn't sticking out of his mouth like Gandalf's had done, because that would not be an endearing look on her husband. She kissed him on the cheek and whispered, "Sorry, sweetheart, but a girl's got to do what a girl's got to do." But her husband's response was a long, drawn-out snort. Meg smiled triumphantly to herself, fully satisfied that now was the quintessential opportunity for her to escape the house, and she felt oddly excited about the prospect of leaving a home that had become like a prison to her of late. She was feeling slightly woozy, but the recent paracetamol she had taken would help her feel halfway normal again by bringing down her temperature. When she closed the front door discreetly behind her, the cold air of early May nudged her cheeks, causing her to shiver, but she was dressed warmly in her jeans, a sweatshirt, and her Canada Goose Alliston Parker, along with a pair of sneakers. She climbed into her car, started up the engine, opening up the garage doors with a remote control, and then left her home, driving away into the night with a great purpose. The uncongenial, friendless, starless night was unusually dark and rather hostile, as even the moonlight had denied its purpose and had refused to make any kind of appearance. Meg left the lights of the town and found herself heading down the backcountry roads towards Ned's old farmhouse. The trouble was Ned's farmhouse was situated on those sequestered, rather remote country roads that were less than agreeable to navigate at this late time of the night. But there was one thing about Meg that most people in town knew about her, and that was she was never overawed or daunted by anything, and was as tenacious as that rambling ivy that grows manically over everything it touches with very little encouragement. Meg could feel the familiar exhilaration welling up in her chest. She felt like a naughty schoolgirl who had been grounded by her parents and had broken out of her bedroom in the dead of night. One thing was for sure, that if Reuben knew what she was up to, he would be less than amused, but what he didn't know would never ever hurt him. Soon Meg found herself at the wooded clearing, not far from Ned's farmhouse, and she parked her car very discreetly behind a couple of lofty trees. She could not be seen from the road, and she sat in the car and waited. Her timing was meticulously perfect, as moments later the familiar sound of a car jolting down the road grabbed her attention. Through the tree she recognized the Tanner Brothers plumber's truck. Good, she thought. He was giving the new stranger in town a lift home. Now was the time for Meg to strike while the iron was hot, with her cock and bull story at the ready. Meg surreptitiously climbed out of her car, making as little noise as possible, feeling ever so slightly giddy on her feet, as she teetered through the trees rather awkwardly, like an unstable, ungainly, inebriated drunk. Her body was abruptly warning her that she clearly was not fit enough to endure this nightly adventure, but Meg did not care. She pulled out the thick wad of tissues from her pocket in her parka and blew her nose furiously hard, and then began to cough and splutter for a few minutes, her forehead becoming so hot and clammy that beads of perspiration began breaking out above her brow. But Meg wiped them away with her tissue, and proceeded undaunted on her way through the trees, using the torch she'd brought along with her to see her way clearly. The lofty congregation of trees swaggered in the wind, whistling and howling, their branches wobbling precariously, but Meg noticed none of this. She did not observe the sounds of the crickets or frogs. She did not notice the absence of moonlight failing to filter through the trees, nor did she observe the tall, ambiguous, lofty figure observing her as she trekked down the earthen path, with only one focus on her mind, and that was to get to Ned's farmhouse. All of a sudden, Meg began to get incredibly hot. The rising heat prickled up her back, travelling indiscriminately up her chest and all over her face. She was incredibly hot. This time she began to sweat like a pig, felt disorientated, befuddled and confused. Her eyes became bleary, and everything around her began to spin, so that she was beginning to see dots. Meg began to reach out for something to steady herself, but she ended up blacking out onto the ground. Moments later she opened her eyes to find this tall, dark creature that reminded her of King Kong, only his face was so human, staring down at her, trying to slap her face. Meg was certain she was delirious. She had to be. She should never have come out here tonight. She wasn't well. Her husband was right about that. What kind of bizarre, outlandish dream was this? Meg closed her eyes tightly and opened them again. The creature was still there, standing over her, slapping her face. But when Meg opened her eyes, she was so afraid by this huge, ambiguous thing standing over her that was titanic in size and girth and weight, and was the scariest thing she'd ever beheld. She let out an ear-piercing scream and then fainted. Back at Ned's farmhouse, Sinead was fussing over the hob at the old range oven, where the kettle was boiling away. Eddie had made himself very comfortable at the kitchen table and was tactlessly pointing out the things in the kitchen that needed fixing. "There's a lot of work to be done here. You can see those tiles there need regrouting. And this floor, well, it's in a bad way." "Oh, I know," said Sinead, shaking her head as she pulled the boiling kettle off the hob and proceeded to pour the boiling water into 2 separate mugs. "Maybe I have bitten off more than I can chew," she admitted. "The kitchen is very tired looking. Just about everything here needs replacing." "Not necessarily," said Eddie encouragingly. "I mean these terracotta tiles, for example. Yes, I agree, they look tired. But I assure you, with some polishing and buffing, they'll be as good as brand new. And these kitchen cupboards over here, well, they're made from excellent wood. They don't make cupboards like this anymore, you know. With some sanding and repainting, if you remove this dated olive green colour and paint them white, they could look very fetching indeed." "I do believe you're right," said Sinead, handing Eddie his mug of coffee and sitting herself opposite him around the kitchen table. It was then the couple heard the sound of a woman screaming. "Did you hear that sound?" said Eddie, looking at Sinead earnestly. For a brief moment an expression of concern dappled his forehead, but then after a few seconds he visibly seemed to relax. She nodded, looking at Eddie through wide eyes. "Do you think someone's in trouble out there?" Eddie shrugged. "I hope not. I don't think so. Let's just say over the years I've got used to strange noises coming from the wood grove. It happens a lot. Sometimes the wailing sounds can be coyotes, wolves, or even geese, believe it or not. It's probably not something to worry about. It's probably not human at all. You know, it's easy to overreact when you live out here in the countryside. And imagine the very worst. You'll soon learn all about that. Believe me, when I was a little boy, I thought the headless horseman was galloping through those woods. Let's just say, the power of suggestion can wreak havoc on an impressionable person. You are bound to be more spooked out here than most, given that you lived in Los Angeles for a long time. You're used to the sounds of the traffic, not the strange sounds of the woodgrove at night. But you'll get used to it, I'm sure." "You're probably right," said Sinead, looking relieved at Eddie's reassuring words that offered her much solace. "I guess moving out here is going to be harder than I anticipated. I mean, it was so dark out there tonight. Absolutely no moonlight at all. And that screaming sound, it sent chills down my spine. You forget I'm an author, so I've got a highly tuned imagination. If I didn't, I wouldn't be any good at what I do." "It looks like you might need me to move in with you," said Eddie, giving her a cheeky grin. "To protect you, of course, from the noises out there." "Oh, I'm not that desperate," she said teasingly. "It'll take more than screaming from the woodgrove for me to beg you to stay, Eddie." The couple continued to talk about what needed to be done at the farmhouse, when all of a sudden Sinead's face went as white as a sheet, the colour draining from her skin. She began to point at the window. "Is everything all right, Sinead?" Eddie asked her. "You look like, well, not very well all of a sudden." I don't know if I'm going completely mad," came the wobbling voice. "I think I've just seen a huge face at the window. A face with yellow eyes. I think it was waving its hand at me. "Oh my God! Oh my God!" she said, throwing her arms above her head. "There was something out there! Something was out there, I know! It was looking in at us! It was the face of a monster!" Eddie grinned. "I think I should remind you, Sinead, that you had over 3 margaritas in town. Maybe you're seeing things that aren't there. I assure you, there's no face at the window. I'm sure it's the alcohol deceiving your brain." Eddie got to his feet. "I think it's my cue to go, Sinead. I'll call you in the morning. You look dog-tired, if you don't mind my saying. I think I should leave you and love you. I've really enjoyed myself this evening, and if you're game, I would like to see you again very much. I think there's something between us, but I would like to take it slow and see where it finally goes. I will be straight with you, Sinead. I haven't felt a connection with another woman like this before. It kind of scares me, but I think you felt it too." Sinead nodded her face, blushing a bright pink colour. "Me too. I think there is a spark between us. And I like you a lot, Eddie. I really didn't expect that to happen. You're not my type." "Not your type?" asked Eddie incredulously. "That's a first. I'm usually every woman's type." "It's not that. It's just that you're exceptionally good-looking, Eddie. And usually good-looking men, well, they rarely ever float my boat. It's not me being mean. It's just my experience with men who have film star-like looks. Usually their personalities are as flat as a beach ball that has lost all its gas. They don't have to work on their personalities, you see, so they're much more shallow, less interesting. But you're different, so I'm pleasantly surprised about that. And yes, I'd like to see you again, and see where this goes." It was at that moment they heard a loud banging against the eaves of the house, as well as a series of loud taps at the window. This time it was Eddie's turn to grow as white as a sheet. "What the hell?" He suddenly grew quite alarmed, for the banging was so intrusively loud that the whole house juddered and shook under its powerful vibration. Something with a brute force had shaken the house. But what could have done that? "I told you," said Sinead, her face paling again, her heart banging so loudly it was slamming against the wall of her chest. "There was something out there. I told you there was. Whatever it is, it's very big. I saw the face staring at me from the window. It was indicating to me." "Have you got a rifle?" Eddie asked Sinead. "Over there," said Sinead, handing over her uncle's old hunting rifle. Eddie took it. "I'm not sure you should go out there," she advised. The banging persisted, but Eddie bravely opened the front door, his rifle armed at the ready. And that was when they both saw it. A large Bigfoot stood outside the front door, cradling a woman in his arms. Both Eddie and Sinead stared at this ambiguous, lofty creature in wondrous awe, wondering what they were seeing. Was it really real? Or had they really overindulged in the alcohol this evening? The creature's body was lit up by the powerful outside light, and the humongous size of him took their breath away. He stood up on 2 feet, easily over 9 foot tall, covered in long flowing dark hair, his face incredibly human, with a furrowed forehead, flat nose, and deep-set dark eyes. In the beginning, Sinead was very fearful. She thought her feet were going to crumble beneath her, and that she was going to collapse and pass out on the floor. But a powerful voice boomed into her head. "Don't be afraid. I'm not going to harm you. This woman needs your help. She's very sick. She's burning up with a fever." When the creature's eyes held hers, Sinead's heart melted like chocolate. The Bigfoot's eyes were the kindest eyes she had ever beheld. Eddie felt it too, because he stepped away to let the Bigfoot into the house. Sinead led him to the spare bedroom, and the Bigfoot placed the woman on the bed. He then spoke to them in a booming voice, in a strange indigenous language that for some bizarre reason Eddie and Sinead perfectly understood. "Milatikanikwa, holinatilakan, homokoshakisana, halinatolokwa." She will be fine. Keep her warm. Give her plenty of fluids. In 4 days' time she will be fully recovered. And with that, he trotted out of the house and was gone. "Oh my God! Did that just happen?" Sinead asked Eddie. "Or am I completely bladdered? I've got to be bladdered. That didn't just happen. A Bigfoot walked into our house with a strange woman. Are we going mad? Did that happen?"
"It happened," said Eddie.
"Who the hell is the woman?" said Sinead, feeling the woman's head when she entered the room. "Oh my God, the creature's right. She's burning up. She's got a dreadful fever."
"I know who it is. It's Meg Riley. Everyone knows Meg Riley," said Eddie, grinning. "She's the town gossip. She's been in bed with pneumonia under strict doctor's orders."
"Well, what the hell is she doing here then?"
Eddie shrugged his shoulders nonchalantly. "It would seem, when you're a busybody like Meg Riley is, not even pneumonia is going to keep you down. My guess is she was here to find out all about you, but pegged out on the way to your front door. She's very sick, you can see."
"Is she really that snoopy?"
"I'm afraid so," said Eddie, grinning.
So what is the end of this rather curious story? I'll tell you. It would seem that Meg was left to recoup at Ned's farmhouse until she finally went home, but she was able to inform the townsfolk all about the new stranger in town. Sinead did fix up the old farmhouse, and she currently lives there with Eddie Tanner, who is a reformed character these days, and the wandering eyes and Casanova spirit are a thing of the past. For it would seem Sinead is now his entire world, and when you find a good thing, you know better than to let it go. The couple are very happily married and have 2 children now, and have never seen the Bigfoot again, but they know he's out there, and that knowledge keeps them very secure. Sinead has written 2 more bestsellers and is very comfortable living in a remote North Carolina town. So there you are. That's my story. Wow, what a wonderful story. Until next time, goodbye and good night.